But maybe to be very clear, or to be more clear, let's get back again to the Navajo research and the perspective that I tried to reveal, I should say, that as far as I can understand, they have on reality. It links up with some of the things I've been talking about in the former couple of minutes when I was talking about the dualism that is sort of hidden and obvious, evident even, for example, our philosophers, but I think for people in general, Western people in general, the dualism that's there, like we, the human beings, humanity, and then on the other hand, as if a second sort of reality, nature. And we utilize nature because you have all sorts of theories there. We have consciousness, they don't. Even animals don't have consciousness. We have social life, we have choice, we have ethics, and all this sort of things is not religion. All this sort of things is not there in nature. That's how we justify this division between these two parts of reality and this dualism. In fact, us, the human beings, a sort of special, of course, natural part of nature also, but above nature somehow, and allowed to use nature then. That's the second thing. And then you get capitalism and you see what it means to use nature, of course. Everything is your property. You sell air, you sell water, you sell this sort of thing, because you own it. You occupy space, outer space, and this sort of thing. Amazing sort of thinking, but one. Now, when starting to try and understand how Navajo reason, and that's just one culture, one people, but still, it became clear to me that in a deep sense, I would say, they are holists, meaning that there is one reality in which everything exists, takes part, if you like. It's very difficult to use terms that are not tainted in this context, because we, of course, we have, as I said, a tradition of a philosophy of being. We have a very, very central position of the verb to be. We speak about essence coming from esse in Latin, which is, of course, to be, etc., etc. We are always thinking about the world as something that's there with certain characteristics, etc. If you come to a language and a cosmology like the Navajo one, if you're confronted with a language where there is no verb to be, then at the first moment, of course, this is shocking. This is amazing. How can they live and not speak about to be, being, existing? No, there's no verb like that. Absolutely none. Like there are no nouns, of course, because there's no things, objects in this particular sense of substances or something like that. Everything is happening, is changing, is processes, is events, whatever you might call it, but you know, it's a world of becoming, if you like, and of changing, etc. So you get a group of verbs, 21, 22, the classificatory verbs, verb stems, in fact, they call them, which in a sense take the place of the verb to be or to exist in our language type, language structure. And these different verbs express ways of continuing to exist, if you like, or changing in this way or another way. And if you look at them, what you say, in fact, is, let me be very concrete here. When I have this object here in our tradition, I can say, well, this is a clear rectangle. It has this geometric form, etc. They don't speak like that. They would say, you know, this here, this top page, this cover, you can speak about this, and in a unique way you can speak about this by saying that you perform this sort of action, a sort of smooth going along. And there's nothing in the neighborhood now where this applies to except for this smooth going along. So that's the rectangular, that's the surface here to begin with. Now all of a sudden, and then you switch to another verb stem, all of a sudden this movement is abruptly and definitively changed. That's what we call the side or something. And you have 4 sides like this, and eventually that's how you build up this rectangular form of this object. But you can speak about this indeed in different ways of action, changes of action, etc., of what is different sorts of happenings that occur when referring to this phenomenon. You can say the same thing, and then we get to cosmology, about, for example, the sun. We say, which is a very strange way of thinking if you really go into this, we say that the air, that's an object, that's a thing, okay? The air is blue. Now, it's probably not blue, but that's not really essential. But we say that the air, if you go up, is getting thinner. What are we talking about? We're talking about an object, right? It's a noun, the air. We say that the sun is like a bowl, let's say. That's a globe that is moving across the sky from the east to the west. Now we know now, since a couple of centuries, that it's not the sun that's moving, but it's us, the earth, that is moving. But apart from that, it was quite a conflict, right, at the time. People got burned at the stake for saying that, etc. Giordano Bruno, because, you know, it was in the Bible that we are in the center of things and the sun is moving around. God himself said so, you know, well, okay, but let alone this point, we say that the sun is this globe that's making a movement. Okay, it's not making a movement, that's one thing. Also, this sun, the thing, the object, as a globe, it's a mass of burning gases, pulsating. Is that a thing? I don't know. Isn't it a process, maybe? The sun in itself? Yeah, but we don't reason that way. We reason with things, right? With objects. And you can go on like this, because all these things, of course, they are fixed objects to some extent, maybe in processes as well, but at least to begin with objects. But then there's us, human beings, this second category in the dualism, who are manipulating these objects, and that's our right to do that. In the Navajo cosmology, this is absolutely weird. That's a bad sort of thinking, if you like. That's improbable. And so they start arguing, saying, you know, we're all part of this, if you like, in a horizontal way. Everything is part of this one existing totality. I have to use nouns, of course. Totality is a noun I use, is even an image that I use, as if you can look from the outside. No, you're in there. That's why I characterize this cosmology, which is theirs, I think, as an action habitat notion of universe, of reality. That is, you're living in a sort of habitat, everything is in there, and that's the reality, the in fact, or if you like, in space is a reality. And it's continuously moving. It's not it hasn't a thing quality, it has process quality. That's action. That is all sorts of things, or all sorts of elements in that one universe, is producing actions with impact on other elements and maybe on everything. But at least basically it's this continuous interchangeable impacting sort of processes. That's reality. And human beings, just like the sun, like animals, like mountains, like whatever, are involved in this complete, complex sort of universe of processes. Which means, and that's extremely fascinating, I think, that if you as human beings think about the Adam and Eve story and our way of looking at the world, but if you as human beings within this cosmology, if you take certain decisions, even if you start thinking, certainly if you start speaking, and of course doing things, a distinction that we make again, we Westerners, we say thinking is free. As long as you don't utter it, as long as you don't act, it's free, it has no impact. No. They say even thinking, you are having impact all the time. There's no escape from this. And so in a sense, things answer or fire back, let's say. So you should be very careful what you are thinking, doing, saying, because it will have impact, and indirectly it will have impact on you. Now, if you like, that is what used to be called the sort of ecological view of Native Americans. It's in a different sense ecological than what we call ecology today, but it's family of that, it's akin to that, indeed. Huh? You reason as if you're not detached, objectifying or something, but you're in there, and so you're having impact. And you should be very careful on what you're doing. You're not the master who can use nature at his will. No, you're having impact, and it will fire back. And you will cause disequilibrium. You will cause disaster. We don't reason that way. We say, with our Prime Minister of a couple of years ago, we say, okay, well, when a problem emerges, I will deal with it. No. You have to reason that, horizontally, you're connected with everything else, and so your choices will have impact on everything else, but in the end also, or maybe soon, also on yourself, on this total equilibrium. That's a holistic view, of course, different from our way of objectifying and managing, etc., as if we are detached, as if we are in what's called a God's eye view. We're on God's shoulder and we look at reality. We're the small masters. He is the big master, we're the small master. But that's, for them, this is a very, very awkward, unrealistic way of looking at the world, at reality. And that's their cosmology. Now, you would think this is interesting, this is fascinating, but it's exotic. Yes, looks like it at first sight, until, of course, you get to the moment, the era that we're living now, and in a sense, nature strikes back in our dualistic view. Look at the climate change, warming, look at the enormous and very rapid destruction of biodiversity. And in later works, also in recent work, I refer to at least five major crises that we are involved with, all of them triggered, caused by human intervention, and in fact all of them by Western human interventions. In our superiority view, we sort of, take whatever we can take, we privatize it, including now today water and the North Pole, and I'll buy Greenland, says Trump. This sort of idea. You don't reason with reality. You think that this is a shop and I have the money, so it's mine. About everything, about oil, about natural resources, about whatever. About human beings. Not only slavery, that's the old style, we don't do that anymore. We say, yes, I don't know, what is, the big things like Amazon, what are they doing? That's very, very close to slavery, I think. Well, But we do it in a more systematic way. For example, a good friend of mine is Laura Nader from Berkeley. And she's doing anthropology of law, legal anthropology, for years. And one of her books that I reviewed is called Plunder. And in that book, that's a very clear title, I think. It's published by Berkeley University Press, California University Press. And in the book, she refers to research of her and of colleagues on the way that, the rather systematic way that pharmaceutical firms, so big pharma, let's say, are screening what is there in terms of interesting DNA material in indigenous peoples from South America. So they sort of buy, of course there's organs that they buy, as you know, it's organ traffic, but they buy DNA. They take a patent on it, and so from that point on, this is so-called their property. And if something turns up, like some pandemic, and they are expecting several, and I think they're right, different pandemics, not only the one we are living today, but they expect different other ones because of the destruction of biodiversity. These things jump over to humans, of course, and to food that we use, etc., etc. So they say, well, you know, and some of these indigenous peoples, they apparently have developed a sort of immunity for this or that, let's say, virus that's living in the jungle, and over generations they have developed immunity, and that's chemistry, of course. Okay, we'll buy a patent on their DNA, and when this pandemic comes around, we can immediately develop the necessary vaccine and put it in the market, and who is earning big money? This sort of thing. So that's making a property of DNA material, of, you know, this sort of thing. That's the Western style of dealing with reality. That's a very, very, very different cosmology. But it's firing back now. And for us, that's quite awakening, I think, in the sense of, okay, how should we react there? And apparently, and that's the sort of thing I'm busy with lately in some of these essays now, is saying, well, we are not equipped really. And look at the sort of management that you find of this sort of crisis now with this pandemic, which is with us for a couple of years now. Well, we'll try and manage it a little bit and maybe a little bit more, but also look at the shop. We don't close the shop, we don't want that. Business, economics, etc. So, and it's a sort of hopeless trial to find a third way out. Always saying to the public, because that's the story of neoliberalism. I mean, it's a longer story, but certainly of neoliberalism. Just wait a little bit, and then we'll be back to normal, meaning back to how we ripped the earth of everything that's meaningful and that's usable before this particular pandemic came around. Instead of saying, you know, we caused this, so we can't cure by doing the same afterwards, right? We'll have the next pandemic. I mean, you don't need to have university degrees to understand that. So no, it's clear. We are living probably in a holistic universe. We're not thinking that way. We're still thinking in this dualistic intuition, as if we can master and then continue with normal when the crisis is over. No, that's and we know for climate, sure, we know that this is the wrong intuition. We should deeply criticize ourselves, step back from there, and try to live and organize our survival in a more horizontal way, with everything else in an equilibrium, and not this extreme privatization, this extreme safeguarding. Again, read Piketty on this, the ideology book first and foremost. ever since whatever revolutions we had, French, American Revolution, etc., private ownership was never questioned throughout all these revolutions. Now that's amazing. So what we call democracy for the last 200, 300 years safeguarded in a very strict way private ownership and had have its go all the way through, which means that we land up today with this sort of unmanageable work of the happy few against everybody else, this sort of thing. So changing, self-critically analyzing this, that's a really very heavy job. I mean, that's not like going back to normal after a crisis, certainly not. But who is willing to? Who understands? I think several people understand, certainly researchers, certainly also politicians feel that this is, But what we find instead, and there again I'm addressed as an anthropologist, I think, is that there's a sort of, people take refuge, look at the Trump reaction and at the extreme right reaction all over Europe now, here, and look at Brexit also. We take refuge in this cultural identity. We know what we are doing and do away with all these foreign interests and foreign claims, etc., let alone refugees and all these people. Do away immigrants, do away with that, and let's be back on our own because that was the right track. No, that was a track that led up. But of course that's what people know, so you can appeal to that and allow for this authoritarian, anti-democratic, anti-humanistic position, rather than critically looking at yourself and say, okay, we got off the track somewhere. We are living in a dangerous way. We're dealing with the world in a dangerous way. And so we should reshuffle in a very fundamental way. And maybe try and think and work and live in this horizontal interconnectedness, rather than this elite that earns stacks and stacks of money, withdraws them from society, the tax paradises, and then say, well, yeah, it will trickle down. Everybody will be rich in the end. I mean, this is a very strange cosmology if you look at it. But getting away from that is a tremendously important but very heavy job, I think. Now, what is happening meanwhile is that the anarchists, who were in the beginning, after the first bourgeois revolutions, let's say, were at least present. I think of maybe first of all Kropotkin, the social anarchists of the time. They were put away, let's say, demolished to some extent by the Marxians, who said, no, we should have a sort of alternative state in the end, Stalinism, Chinese communism, etc., and that will supplant capitalism and all will be well. No, because they're mainly in the same trap of dualism, etc., and exploiting, and the history unfortunately shows that I'm right in that. I mean, the results of the Marxist alternative, economic alternative then, to the economic political, to the liberal capitalist alternative, are not grandiose. I mean, you can't say that this is absolutely progress for humanity or for the world. And the anarchists were put away, let's say, because they were dreamers, of course, and no state and sovereignty of everybody, etc., and small circles of horizontal organizations. But today, and that's wonderful news, partly through this indigenous peoples from South America, for example, in that line of tradition with the convivir movements, partly in our areas, I mean in Western countries with the commons, the anarchist perspective is back again. It's forceful, it's not very much structured, I think. And for example, again, and that's interesting, that's in a sense it's pleasant also. Some anthropologists, economic anthropologists, Marshall Salins from Chicago, David Graeber, one of his students, who taught in London, Hickel. These people are all of them economic anthropologists, but in this, if you like, anarchistic way of thinking. Chomsky, to some extent, he's not anthropologist, but well. And that's intriguing. They understood somehow, but trying to have this, well, disseminated, to have this broadly discussed and maybe adopted in social movements, that's, for us in the West, is a major job. So either you get depressed there, say this is impossible, and then we will end in culture wars. That's the Huntington position. And the happy few will be happy and all the rest, is lost. Or you have to see how you can multiply and fortify this commons movement more, centered on the power of cities, city areas, and the commons, short track economics and that sort of thing. Donut economics, all this sort of thing. It's there, it's happening, it's blooming a little bit, but it's so small. But this is probably the alternative, I think, as well.